The air in the grand ballroom of the Hilton was thick, not with the usual buzz of a successful charity event, but with a heavy, palpable silence, a silence that hummed with failure. Sarah, a bright-eyed volunteer with a meticulously ironed purple sash proclaiming charity champion, clutched her clipboard so tightly her knuckles were white. Her heart, usually so full of optimism, felt like a lead weight in her chest. It was 7:30 p.m., 2 hours into the annual Helping Hands charity auction, and the situation was dire. The goal tonight was to raise enough money to build a new community center for disadvantaged youth, a place for after-school programs, a safe haven, a beacon of hope. But looking around the half-empty ballroom, hope seemed to be a rapidly diminishing resource. The tables, once gleaming with promise, now looked forlorn. The beautiful centerpieces, arranged with such care, seemed to wilt under the harsh spotlight. And the people, oh, the people! What few attendees there were seemed more interested in their lukewarm coffee and discreet glances at their watches than in the exquisite items on display. A signed baseball bat, a weekend getaway to a picturesque cabin, even a rare first edition novel. All were sitting stagnant, their bid sheets pitifully blank, or marked with bids so low they were an insult. Mr. Henderson, the charity's usually unflappable director, stood by the podium, his face a rodat of stress. Cleared his throat, his voice usually booming now, thin and reedy. "Folks, let's look at Lot 27. A magnificent handcrafted chessboard made from sustainable wood." His words trailed off, swallowed by the vast emptiness of the room. A lone cough echoed from a table near the back. Sarah watched a couple elegantly dressed stand up and begin to make their way to the exit. She wanted to rush over to plead with them, to tell them about the kids, about the dreams of the community center, but what could she say? The truth was, the event was a flop earlier that day. The mood had been so different. The volunteers had been buzzing, arranging auction items, polishing silverware, envisioning a night of generosity and success. Sarah herself had spent hours meticulously polishing the silver platter that was Lot 14, imagining the bidding war it would inspire. Now Lot 14 sat untouched, reflecting the ceiling lights like a tear. The main problem, as everyone whispered, was the lack of a draw. Last year, a local sports star had made an appearance, and the donations had flowed like a river. This year, their scheduled celebrity guest, a minor reality TV personality, had canceled at the last minute, citing a sudden scheduling conflict. It had been a polite euphemism for found something better to do. Charity couldn't afford a big-name replacement, and their last-ditch attempt to secure a regional comedian fell through when his car broke down on the highway. Now the evening was dissolving into an embarrassing silence. The auctioneer, a perpetually jovial man named Barry, was trying to inject energy into the room, but even his usually booming voice sounded defeated. "All right, Lot 32, a private cooking class with Chef Antoine. Who'll start us at $500? 500. Anyone for 4? 300. Do I hear 200? A single shaky hand went up from an elderly woman in the front row. 50, she mumbled, looking embarrassed. Barry's smile faltered. $50 for Chef Antoine. Folks, this is a master chef. For royalty. His gaze swept the room, pleading. No one budged. All right, $50 going once, twice sold to the kind lady for $50. He slammed the gavel with a thud that sounded more like a sigh. Sarah bit her lip. $50 for a cooking class that normally cost hundreds. It wasn't just disappointing. It was heartbreaking. Every failed bid chipped away at the dream of the community center. She imagined the kids, their faces full of anticipation, waiting for a safe space, a place to learn and grow. And here in this echoing ballroom, their hopes were slowly dying. She overheard a whispered conversation between Mr. Henderson and Maria, the event planner. Maria's face was pale, her usually impeccable bun slightly askew. "We're nowhere near the target, Robert," she murmured, her voice tight with panic. "At this rate, we won't even cover the venue costs." Mr. Henderson ran a hand through his thinning hair. "I know, Maria. I don't know what else to do. We've promoted it. We've called everyone we know. It's just not working." The truth of his words hung in the air like a pall. They had tried everything. Every angle. Every contact. All the hard work. All the dedication. All the dreams. It was all slipping away. Clock on the wall seemed to mock them, ticking away the precious minutes. Each tick a step closer to utter defeat. The desperate hours had truly begun. The silence in the ballroom was no longer just heavy. It was suffocating. Barry, the auctioneer, had started rambling about the weather, trying to fill the void between pitifully low bids. Mr. Henderson was pacing near the back exit, occasionally peering out as if hoping a line of generous donors would suddenly appear. Maria was at a side table, furiously tapping on her laptop, no doubt trying to find last-minute ways to cut costs, but her shoulders were slumped in defeat. Sarah, leaning against a velvet rope that cordoned off the most expensive and thus far most ignored auction items, felt a wave of nausea. The air conditioning was on full blast, but she felt a cold sweat prickling her skin. This wasn't just a charity event. It was the culmination of months of planning, of countless sleepless nights. For Mr. Henderson and Maria, and for the community. It was everything. She thought of Mrs. Gable, a sweet elderly woman who lived across from the empty lot where the community center was supposed to be built. Mrs. Gable had told Sarah stories of kids hanging out on street corners, of teenagers getting into trouble because there was nowhere else for them to go. A community center would change all that. It would give them a space, a sense of belonging, a future. And now that future felt as distant as the stars. A chime sounded from the PA system, signaling the end of a break that no one had really taken. Barry cleared his throat, trying to muster some enthusiasm. "All right, folks, we're back. And up next we have drumroll, please, lot 45. A truly unique, one-of-a-kind handmade quilt, generously donated by the Willow Creek Quilting Guild." Quilt was indeed beautiful. A vibrant tapestry of colors and patterns. Sarah knew the guild members had poured their hearts into it, each stitch a testament to their love for the community. But love, it seemed, couldn't pay the bills. The bids limped along, barely reaching $100. Mr. Henderson walked over to Sarah, his face grim. "Sarah, you've been wonderful tonight, but, well, I think we're going to have to call it early. There's just no point dragging this out." His voice was barely a whisper. "We'll have to consider other options for the center. Maybe scaling back, finding a smaller space, scaling back." The words felt like a punch to the gut. Scaling back meant fewer programs, fewer kids reached, fewer lives changed. It meant the dream already bruised would be permanently diminished. "No," the word burst from Sarah before she could stop herself. Mr. Henderson looked at her, surprised. "We can't just give up, Mr. Henderson. Not yet." He sighed, a weary sound. "Sarah, I appreciate your passion. Believe me, but look around. The people who are here have already given what they can, and most of our expected donors simply didn't show up. We've exhausted every option." Sarah's mind was racing, desperate, clinging to any shred of an idea. She remembered a conversation she'd overheard months ago when they were first brainstorming celebrity guests. Maria had joked about calling Elvis Presley, then quickly dismissed it. But what if for a wild, impossible second it wasn't a joke? Sarah knew it was crazy. Elvis Presley had passed away decades ago, yet a tiny, irrational spark ignited within her. There were impersonators, of course, but that wouldn't bring in the big bucks. No, they needed something. Someone truly extraordinary. "Mr. Henderson," Sarah began, her voice gaining a surprising strength. "Do you remember when Maria joked about calling Elvis?" Mr. Henderson looked at her as if she'd lost her mind. "Sarah, with all due respect, Elvis Presley is no longer with us. It's a sad fact, but it's true." No, I know," Sarah insisted, her mind working furiously. "But what about What about someone connected to him? Someone who knew him? Someone who could, I don't know, share a story, maybe even sing a song in his style. Someone who could bring a piece of that legend here. She was grasping at straws, but the straw felt like a lifeline. Maria, who had joined them, snorted softly. Sarah, even if we could find someone like that, who would it be? And would they even agree? Legends don't just show up for failing charity auctions. But what if they did? Sarah pressed, her eyes wide with a desperate plea. What if there's someone, anyone, who knew him well and understood what he stood for? He was famous for his generosity, wasn't he? His kindness. Maybe someone connected to his legacy would want to help a good cause. Mr. Henderson looked from Sarah's fervent face to the half-empty room. He knew it was a long shot, a hallucination born of desperation. But what did they have to lose? They were already at rock bottom. "Who are you thinking of, Sarah?" he asked, his voice slow, cautious, as if talking to a child who had just suggested they could fly to the moon. I don't know exactly," Sarah admitted, her initial burst of inspiration hitting a logical wall. "But I remember reading something once about how he helped people quietly, without fanfare. What if there's someone still alive, a friend, a family member who carries on that spirit?" Maria scoffed again. "You're talking about contacting the Presley estate, Sarah, or his inner circle. Do you have any idea how many layers of security and agents and publicists there are?" "Impossible is better than giving up," Sarah shot back, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. "Please, Mr. Henderson, just give me 10 minutes. Let me try one phone call, one long shot. We have nothing left to lose, do we?" Mr. Henderson looked at the clock. It was almost 8 p.m. Most people would be gone by 8:30. 10 minutes, he repeated, rubbing his temples. The idea was absurd, fantastical, but the desperation in Sarah's eyes was real, and in that moment he realized that a crazy idea was the only thing they had left. He nodded slowly. "All right, Sarah, 10 minutes. Do what you can, but don't get your hopes up." Sarah didn't need to be told. Her hopes were already so fragile they could shatter with a single breath, but a flicker, however tiny, had just been ignited. And in the oppressive darkness of failure, even a flicker felt like a supernova. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling as she began to type into the search bar. Elvis Presley, personal friends, charity work. Sarah's fingers danced across her phone screen, a frantic blur of taps and swipes. Her mind raced, trying to formulate the right search terms. Elvis Presley, private charity. Elvis Presley, generosity. Friends of Elvis, who help. Click felt weighted with the entire future of the community center. Mr. Henderson and Maria watched her, a mixture of skepticism and a tiny, almost invisible flicker of curiosity on their faces. She found a few articles, mostly old fan memoirs or biographical snippets, detailing Elvis's well-known acts of kindness. He'd bought cars for strangers, paid medical bills, supported local charities quietly. He was legendary not just for his music, but for his heart. This fueled Sarah's resolve. If anyone's legacy could inspire help now, it was his. Then she found it. A small, almost obscure blog post from years ago, written by someone who claimed to have been a distant relative of one of Elvis's closest confidants, a man named Joe Esposito. The blog mentioned that Joe had, even after Elvis's passing, continued to quietly support causes that Elvis himself would have championed. Post provided an email address, clearly old, perhaps even defunct, but it was a lead. Found something, Sarah whispered almost to herself. She quickly composed an email. She explained the situation, the failing auction, the urgent need for the community center, the charity's mission. She described the desolate ballroom, the dwindling crowd, the heartbreaking low bids. She poured her heart into it, hoping the sincerity would somehow bridge the impossible distance. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. "Anything, Sarah? I sent an email," she admitted, her voice a little shaky, "to a very old contact. Possibly. It's a long shot." Maria rolled her eyes. An email, Sarah. We need something now. We're talking minutes, not hours. Or days. For an email response. I know, Sarah said, her shoulders slumping. She knew it was hopeless. The digital world was fast, but not that fast for a message to reach someone connected to a legend and then for that person to mobilize a surprise appearance. Barry, the auctioneer, looked at Mr. Henderson. Robert, what's the plan here? We've got maybe another 30 minutes of interest. Tops, should I wrap things up? Mr. Henderson hesitated. He looked at Sarah, then at the empty room. Give it 5 more minutes, Barry, just 5. Perhaps it was Sarah's stubborn hope, or perhaps a desperate, irrational belief that something, anything, might change. Sarah returned to her post, trying to look busy, but her eyes kept darting to her phone. Nothing, of course not. She was being foolish. This was a charity auction, not a Hollywood movie. The clock ticked. 5 minutes turned into 10. Then 15 people were leaving in steady streams now. The last few hardcore attendees, mostly friends of the charity organizers, were starting to gather their coats. The sound of their polite farewells echoed in the vast room. Then her phone vibrated. A notification. A new email. Sarah's heart leaped into her throat. She fumbled with her phone, her fingers suddenly clumsy. It was from an unfamiliar address, a series of random letters and numbers, but the subject line read, Helping Hands. Charity auction. She tapped it open, her breath held tight. The message was short, almost terse. Your email was forwarded to me. I understand your predicament. My schedule is tight. What is the precise address of your venue and the exact time you need a draw? This is highly unusual. Do not mention this to anyone. Sarah's eyes scanning every word. Do not mention this to anyone. Chill ran down her spine, but it wasn't fear. It was exhilaration. This wasn't a no. It was a maybe, a conditional cryptic, unbelievable maybe. She looked up, her eyes wide, searching for Mr. Henderson. He was across the room talking to Barry, his face etched with resignation. Maria was packing up her laptop. Mr. Henderson, Sarah called out, her voice a loud whisper that cut through the despondent hum of the room. He turned, his eyebrows raised. Sarah rushed over, holding out her phone, her hand trembling. Look, I got a reply. I got a reply to the email. Mr. Henderson took the phone, his eyes widening as he read the message. Maria peered over his shoulder. What is this? Maria whispered, her voice laced with disbelief. Who sent this? Do not mention this to anyone. Is this a prank? I don't know who sent it, Sarah admitted, but it's a response to my email about Elvis's connections. It's asking for the address and the exact time we need a draw. Mr. Henderson's eyes scanned the message again, then fixed on Sarah. A draw, he repeated, a flicker of something he hadn't felt all night, hope stirring in his chest. What kind of draw? I don't know, Sarah exclaimed, half laughing, half crying, but it's something. It's not a no, Maria. Ever the pragmatist frowned. This is too vague. It could be anyone, a local magician, a tribute artist who expects payment we can't afford. Or it could be someone important, Mr. Henderson said slowly, his voice laced with a newfound wonder. Someone who values discretion, someone who values the spirit of generosity, Sarah mentioned. He looked at the message again, then at the small, glowing screen. What do we do? Sarah responded. Yes, Sarah urged. Immediately. Give them the address. Tell them. Tell them we need something miraculous. Now, within the next hour. His mind racing. Typed a quick reply on Sarah's phone, his fingers surprisingly steady. He gave the exact address, the current time, and reiterated the dire situation. He asked simply if they could offer any help, no matter how small, to inspire the remaining guests. He pressed send. The three of them stood there, huddled together, eyes fixed on the phone. The ballroom was emptying out even faster. Now the last vestiges of the auction were fading. But in their small corner, a secret, unbelievable whisper had just turned into a faint but distinct buzz. The stakes had never been higher, and the secret, the incredibly unlikely secret, had just begun. The minutes after sending the reply felt like hours. Sarah, Mr. Henderson, and Maria stood rooted to the spot, their eyes glued to Sarah's phone. The email had been so brief, so cryptic, yet it held the weight of all their hopes. The idea that someone, anyone, connected to the legendary generosity of Elvis Presley might respond, let alone act, was almost too much to comprehend. "Probably a hoax," Maria whispered, breaking the tense silence. "Someone trying to get information or play a trick. Or someone who's genuinely intrigued," Mr. Henderson countered, though his voice lacked conviction. He wanted to believe desperately, but his pragmatic side was screaming caution. Sarah didn't say anything. She simply willed the phone to make a sound, to light up with another message. Every passing second felt like a blow. Barry the auctioneer had started gathering his notes, his face a picture of exhaustion. The remaining attendees, perhaps a dozen people, now were huddled near the door, ready to leave. Suddenly Sarah's phone rang. It wasn't an email notification, it was a phone call. The number was blocked. All three of them jumped. Sarah snatched the phone, her hand shaking so badly she almost dropped it. Mr. Henderson leaned in his ear, practically pressed against the speaker. "Hello?" Sarah managed, her voice barely a whisper. A deep, calm voice tinged with this slight southern accent came through the receiver. "Is this Sarah from the Helping Hands?" "Charity." "Yes." Sarah Pranke gasped. "This is Sarah. My name is John. I'm calling in response to your email." The voice was clear, authoritative, yet strangely warm. Sarah looked at Mr. Henderson and Maria, her eyes wide with disbelief. This was real. "Yes, Mr. John, we are the auction. It's not going well at all. I see my associate forwarded your message. He said you were looking for a draw. Something to inspire your guests." There was a pause. "And you mentioned Mr. Presley." "Yes. Well, we know he's not here, but we were hoping someone connected to his spirit of generosity. Someone who knew him might be able to help, to share a story maybe, or just offer some words of encouragement." She held her breath. John chuckled softly, a low rumbling sound. "I understand. Mr. Presley was indeed a generous man, and he had a soft spot for good causes, especially those helping young folks find their way." He paused again, and Sarah thought she heard a faint, familiar melody in the background, almost imperceptible. She tried to focus, to make sense of this unbelievable conversation. "So, here's the deal," John continued. "I happen to be with someone who knew Mr. Presley very well, someone who often accompanied him on his travels and who certainly embodies that generous spirit you spoke of." Sarah felt a surge of hope, so powerful it almost buckled her knees. "Really? Oh, that would be amazing. Even just a few words, a brief appearance, would mean the world." "Well," John said, "my associate is quite particular. He doesn't make many public appearances these days, but your email, your passion struck a chord. He understands the importance of helping those in need." Mr. Henderson grabbed Sarah's arm, silently urging her to ask for details. Who is it?" Sarah ventured, her voice trembling with anticipation. "And could they possibly make it tonight? We're losing our audience fast." John was quiet for a moment. "He's here in the city, and yes, he might be willing to make a very brief appearance. Very brief, mind you, and under one condition." "Any condition? Discretion?" John said firmly. "Absolute, complete discretion. No announcements, no fanfare. Just an introduction from your auctioneer when the time is right, and certainly no mention of who he is before he's on stage. He likes to surprise people." Sarah looked at Mr. Henderson, whose face was a mask of disbelief and cautious elation. "We can do that," Sarah promised. "Absolutely. No announcements, no names until he's on stage. We understand completely." "Good," John said. "He's a man who appreciates a quiet entrance. He'll be there in, let's say, 20 minutes. Be ready. 20 minutes. Sarah's jaw dropped. 20 minutes, but who is it? John chuckled again. You'll see. Just trust me. It'll be a draw. Prepare a space for him backstage near the stage entrance. And remember, absolute secrecy. Not a word to anyone, not even your other volunteers. This is between us for now, understood? Sarah practically shouted, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet, John said, his voice fading slightly. Just make sure it's worth his time. Good luck with your community center. And with that, he hung up. Sarah slowly lowered the phone, her eyes wide, staring at the blank screen. Who was it? Maria demanded, shaking her arm. What did they say? He's coming, Sarah breathed, unable to keep the disbelief from her voice. Someone who knew Elvis very well, someone who embodies his generous spirit. He's coming in 20 minutes. Mr. Henderson ran a hand over his face. 20 minutes, but who? He said it was a surprise, Sarah explained, recounting the conversation, emphasizing the need for absolute secrecy. He just said to be ready and not to say a word. Maria looked skeptical. A surprise? This sounds like a cheap impersonator wanting to make an entrance. We can't let some random person on stage in 20 minutes. He said he was with someone who knew Elvis Maria, Mr. Henderson said, his voice gaining conviction. And he emphasized discretion. That sounds real important. Who else would demand that kind of secrecy? His mind was racing, trying to put the pieces together. No name, just a promise of a draw. It was crazy. It was unbelievable, but it was happening. Sarah, go tell Barry to prepare for a very special, unannounced guest. In 20 minutes. Tell him to keep it vague. Just a friend of the charity. Brian, come with me. We need to clear a path. Make sure the backstage area is secure and ready, and remember, not a word to anyone. As they sprang into action, the weight of the failing auction temporarily lifted, replaced by a surge of frantic energy and an almost unbearable suspense. Who could it be? The thought alone sent shivers down Sarah's spine. The unbelievable call had just thrown their desperate night into a whirlwind of the impossible. The next 20 minutes were a blur of frenzied activity. Sarah rushed over to Barry, the auctioneer, who was looking increasingly glum as he watched the last few attendees trickle out. Barry, Mr. Henderson needs you to make an announcement, Sarah whispered urgently, trying to keep her voice even. We have a very special, unannounced guest, arriving in minutes. You need to keep the remaining audience here. Drum up some suspense. Barry squinted at her, confused. A guest who? Sarah, there's hardly anyone left. We're about to pack it in. I know, but please trust me. This is important. Mr. Henderson says it's a friend of the charity who has flown in at the last minute and will be making a very brief, very special appearance. No names, no details, just that. Barry hesitated, then caught Mr. Henderson's eye across the room. Mr. Henderson gave him a firm, decisive nod. Barry sighed, but turned back to the microphone, a flicker of professional curiosity in his eyes. He had nothing to lose. Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please. Barry's voice boomed, cutting through the sparse chatter. The few remaining guests already on their way out paused. Curious. We have just received word of an incredibly special, unannounced guest who has made a last-minute decision to join us tonight. A few people paused, their coats halfway on. A couple who had been halfway out the door slowly turned back. Another no-name celebrity. Someone whispered, They're just trying to keep us here. But the sheer desperation in Barry's voice, combined with the mystery, kept a dozen or so people from leaving. It wasn't a roaring crowd, but it was something. Meanwhile, Mr. Henderson and Maria were moving with surprising speed. We need to clear the stage access. Mr. Henderson instructed Maria, his voice low and urgent. And make sure there's a chair and a microphone ready, and water, maybe a baggage attendant just in case. Maria, still wary but caught up in the frantic energy, nodded. She quickly signaled a few other volunteers, discreetly asking them to prepare the area. The air backstage usually a jumble of discarded props and empty water bottles, was suddenly charged with a strange, nervous energy. Sarah stood near the main entrance, her heart doing somersaults. She scanned the room, looking for any sign of a new arrival. She watched the main doors, but also the side entrance where VIPs sometimes slipped in. She saw nothing. Clock seemed to slow down, each second stretching into an eternity. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The small group of remaining guests were beginning to shift impatiently. Barry was starting to sweat under the stage lights. "They're not coming, are they?" Maria whispered to Mr. Henderson, who was now standing next to Sarah, both of them staring at the door. "Just wait," Mr. Henderson murmured, though his own doubt was beginning to creep in. He had placed all his remaining chips on this one impossible bet. Suddenly, a discreet side door, usually reserved for staff and delivery, opened slightly. A tall, broad-shouldered man dressed in a dark suit slipped in. He scanned the room with perfection. He gave a subtle nod. Sarah's breath hitched. This wasn't the kind of person who just wandered in. This was a security person. The man in the suit approached them, his step silent. "Mr. Henderson, Sarah." His voice was calm, deep. It was John, the voice from the phone. He didn't offer a hand to shake, just a brief, assessing look. "My apologies for the delay. We had to ensure privacy." "No problem at all." Mr. Henderson," said his voice tight with nerves. "We're just so grateful you came." John gestured towards the side door. "He's ready, just a few words from the auctioneer. A simple introduction. No names until he steps into the light. Is the stage clear?" "Yes," Sir Maria confirmed, her skepticism momentarily forgotten in the face of this sudden, very real development. "Everything's ready." John turned towards the door. "He'll only be on for a few minutes, just long enough to make an impact." As he spoke, the side door opened wider. A figure, silhouetted against the dimmer light of the hallway, stood there. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with a distinct regal bearing. The back of his hair was dark, slicked back in a style that was instantly recognizable even in shadow. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She felt a jolt, an electric surge as if struck by lightning. No, it couldn't be. Her mind screamed against the impossible, but her eyes saw what they saw. "Barry," Mr. Henderson called out, his voice hoarse with awe. "Now tell them about our special guest." Barry, seeing the figure emerge, swallowed hard. His eyes, usually so quick, were wide with a mix of confusion and wonder. Couldn't quite make out who it was, but the aura radiating from the figure was undeniable. "Ladies and gentlemen," Barry stammered into the microphone, his voice wavering slightly, "we have truly been blessed tonight. Against all odds, a very special, very generous, and incredibly beloved friend has arrived. He's someone whose music has touched millions, whose spirit of give a warm helping hands. Welcome to a true American icon." The figure stepped fully into the ballroom. And as the stage lights caught him, a collective gasp rippled through the few remaining attendees. It wasn't just a ripple. It was a wave of pure, stunned disbelief. A woman in the front row dropped her handbag. A man gasped so loudly it was audible across the room. The whispers in the room had suddenly turned into an incredulous, almost reverent buzz. Everyone knew in that split second who it was. The unbelievable had just walked in. The air in the ballroom crackled with an energy that had been utterly absent moments before. The dozen or so remaining guests, who had been on the verge of abandoning the failing auction, were now frozen in place, their eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and awe. The figure who had just stepped onto the stage was unmistakable, even to those who might have only known him from old photographs or grainy film. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with a quiet, almost regal grace. His dark hair was swept back, a familiar curl falling just so. He wore a crisp, tailored suit that shimmered under the lights. His face, though perhaps a little older, a little more weathered than in the iconic images, was still strikingly handsome, his eyes holding a depth of kindness and a hint of mischief. It was impossible. It had to be. Yet he was standing there, A living legend, a ghost from the past made flesh. A woman in the third row let out a choked cry. No, it can't be. Her husband, equally stunned, could only nod, his mouth agape. Barry, the auctioneer, stood speechless, his hand still on the microphone, his mind struggling to reconcile what he was seeing with what he knew to be true. He'd announced a true American icon. But his brain hadn't truly believed it would be this American icon. Mr. Henderson and Mariah, standing beside Sarah, exchanged looks of utter bewilderment. Their initial relief was quickly replaced by a profound, almost spiritual. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. The unbelievable call had promised a draw. It had delivered a miracle. The man on stage surveyed the room with a calm gaze, a faint knowing smile playing on his lips. Then he adjusted the microphone. His voice, when it came, was unmistakable. Deep, rich with that iconic southern drawl that had captivated millions. "Well now," he drawled, his voice filling the room, "looks like I'm a little late to the party, ain't I?" His words, simple as they were, broke the spell of silence. A ripple of gasps, then murmurs, then outright whispers erupted. "It eyes him. How is this possible? He's alive." Barry, finally snapping out of his daze, managed to stammer, Ladies and gentlemen, we are truly honored. It is an absolute privilege to welcome the king himself, Elvis Presley." The applause, initially tentative, then swelled into a roar disproportionate to the small number of people in the room. Some people stood up, craning their necks, trying to get a better look, tears in their eyes. Fonts, which had been mostly ignored all night, were suddenly whipped out, flashing as people tried to capture the impossible moment. Elvis, for it was truly him, gave a slight bow, a charming smile on his face. "Thank you kindly. I heard this charity was doing some mighty fine work for the young folks, and well, that's something that's always been close to my heart." His presence alone was electrifying. The very air vibrated with his charisma. It wasn't just a person on stage, it was a phenomenon. He continued, his voice resonating with an almost hypnotic quality. "My good friend John, here he told me y'all were having a bit of a slow night. Said you needed a little spark. Well, I reckon I can try to help with that." He looked around the almost empty ballroom, his eyes twinkling. "Don't seem like there's too many folks left to spark, though, do there?" He chuckled, and the sound was like music. "But for those of y'all who stuck around, I appreciate it, and I appreciate what you're trying to do here." He then did something unexpected. He walked over to one of the auction display tables. He picked up the handmade quilt. Lot 45, which had only received bids up to a paltry $100. He held it up, admiring the patchwork. "Now this here quilt," he said, his voice softening, "this reminds me of my mama's quilts, made with love, stitch by stitch. Something like this. It's priceless, really. But since we're in an auction," he paused, then looked directly at the crowd. "How about we start this quilt again? And how about I make the first bid?" The room held its breath. "I'll bid $5,000 for this beautiful quilt," Elvis announced, his voice clear and firm. $5,000 for a quilt that had been struggling to reach 100. $5,000, Barry stammered, his eyes wide. From Mr. Presley himself? Do I hear 6,007? Who will match the king's generosity?" The silence was gone, replaced by a wave of excited chatter, a buzz that was alive and vibrant. People were looking at each other, whispering furiously. The rumors, once dismissed as desperate fantasies, were now undeniably real. The sheer audacity of it, the impossible reality of Elvis Presley standing before them, was almost too much to process. But the bids, spurred by the unbelievable generosity of a legend, began to rise, slowly at first. Then, with increasing confidence, the magic of the king had just begun to work its wonders. Backstage, the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Not the despairing tension of earlier, but an electrifying, almost unbelievable kind of suspense. Sarah, Mr. Henderson, and Maria stood in a small alcove, watching the stage monitor, their faces a mixture of shock, awe, and sheer disbelief. Elvis Presley was actually on stage. He had just bid $5,000 on a quilt, and the energy in the ballroom had completely shifted. It was no longer a failing auction. It was a living, breathing legend, bringing the magic back to life. I can't believe it," Maria whispered, her voice hoarse. It's him. How is this even possible?" Mr. Henderson, usually composed, was openly staring at the screen, his mouth slightly agape. "I don't know, Maria. I truly don't. But he's here, and he's saving us." His eyes were wide with a mix of wonder and a dawning realization of the sheer magnitude of this moment. Sarah, however, felt a surge of pure, unadulterated joy. All the stress, the fear, the exhaustion seemed to drain away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of triumph. She dared to hope for the impossible, and the impossible had delivered. John, the quiet, imposing man who had brought Elvis in, stood a few feet away, observing their reactions, with a subtle, knowing smile. He then turned to them. "He's going to sing a few songs," he said, his voice low and calm. "Just a few. And then he might encourage a few more bids. Sing." Sarah's heart pounded. He hadn't just appeared. He was more than they could have ever dreamed. "He'll need a proper microphone then," Maria quickly recovered her event. Planner instincts kicking in, and maybe a spotlight. The stage lights are a bit general. "He's fine with whatever you have," John said with a wave of his hand. "He's not here for the showmanship. Not really, he's here for the cause." He then looked at Sarah. "He saw your email. He liked your spirit." Sarah felt a blush creep up her neck. Her simple, desperate email had reached the king. It was truly unfathomable. On stage, Elvis had just finished speaking about the quilt, which had now been bid up to $7,500. He walked over to the microphone, the one Barry had been using. "Now," he said, his voice taking on a different timbre, a note of anticipation, "I reckon I could sing a little something for y'all, to help sweeten the pot, so to speak." The remaining dozen guests erupted in cheers. Someone even let out a small sob. The sound of their enthusiasm echoed through the vast, mostly empty room. It wasn't about the numbers anymore. It was about the sheer, undeniable magic of the moment. "Barry," Mr. Henderson said urgently, pulling the auctioneer aside, "get the sound technician to adjust the levels. Make sure the microphone is perfect. And, for goodness sake, find some appropriate music to play for his entrance." Barry, still looking utterly shell-shocked, nodded mutely, and stumbled off towards the sound booth, muttering, "Elvis, Elvis, how?" Maria was already directing volunteers. "Clear that table, move those chairs. We need space. And where's the best spot for a camera? Someone needs to record this for the charity's archives." John held up a hand. "No professional recording. Please, no flash photography. Just the natural light and the good memory." Maria looked disappointed but nodded. "Understood." The king's rules were the king's rules. Elvis took a deep breath, and the very air in the ballroom seemed to thicken. He looked out at the small, captivated audience, a genuine smile on his face. He seemed entirely at ease, as if performing for a small gathering was as natural as breathing. "This song," he began, his voice soft, "is for all the dreamers, for all the young folks who need a little help reaching for their star, and for those of y'all who are kind enough to help them do it." A familiar, iconic guitar riff, almost ghost-like, seemed to fill the air. Though no band was visible, it was as if the music simply emanated from him. And then he began to sing. "Wise men say only fools rush in, but I can't help falling in love with you." His voice, it was undeniably, unmistakably his. Every note was perfect. Every inflection, it wasn't an impersonation. It was the true, pure sound of a legend. The few people remaining in the ballroom seemed to sway, some wiping away tears, others simply staring in stunned reverence. The quiet whispers had turned into an awestruck hush. Backstage, Sarah felt tears stream down her face. It wasn't just the beauty of the song or the unbelievable fact of Elvis being there. It was the realization that the community center, the dream, was now real. It was going to happen. All because a desperate volunteer sent a crazy email and a legendary heart responded. The grand entrance had finally happened, and it was more magnificent than any staged spectacle. The first notes of Can't Help Falling in Love filled the room, and the remaining attendees were utterly transfixed. It wasn't just a song. It was a connection to a past, a moment of pure, impossible magic. His voice, deep and resonant, effortlessly soared through the ballroom, wrapping itself around every heart. The subtle sway of his hips, the gentle nod of his head, the way he held the microphone. Every gesture was iconic, ingrained in the collective memory of generations. Sarah watched from the wings, tears streaming down her face, a silent testament to the raw emotion of the moment. Mr. Henderson and Maria stood beside her, equally captivated. Even John, the enigmatic security man, allowed a faint smile to cross his lips, observing the impact of his charge. Elvis finished the song to a thunderous, emotional applause that seemed to echo with the cheers of millions. The small crowd, though few in number, made up for it with the sheer intensity of their reaction. They weren't just clapping, they were roaring their appreciation, their disbelief, their pure joy. Thank you very much," Elvis said, his voice tinged with genuine warmth. He looked at the audience, his eyes twinkling. "You know this song. It's about love, and what y'all are doing here tonight for these young folks. That's love, pure and simple." He walked towards the auction table, picking up another item, a framed, signed photograph of a famous sports team. It had barely garnered a bid of $200. "Now, I might not know much about sports," he said, a playful grin on his face, "but I know a good cause when I see one, and this photograph, it means something to someone. It means a chance for these kids to have a place to play, to learn, to grow." He turned to Barry, the auctioneer, who was still trying to recover his composure. Barry cleared his throat, his voice still a bit shaky. $200, Mr. Presley, sir?" "200?" Elvis scoffed playfully. "For a piece of history like this, and for a future for these kids. Nah, we could do better." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd, a challenge in his gaze. "How about I start us off again right now? At $10,000. Another collective gasp. $10,000. The room erupted into a fresh wave of excitement. This was beyond a draw. This was a full-blown financial intervention from a legend. $10,000. Barry bellowed, finally, finding his auctioneer's voice now imbued with a new sense of purpose and a touch of awe. $10,000 for Mr. Presley? Do I hear 11-12? Who will match the king's generosity and help build this community center? A man in the front row who looked like a local business owner nervously raised his hand. 11,000. 11,000, Barry shouted, going to 11. Do I hear 12? The atmosphere was electric. The few remaining guests, now fully engaged, began to bid against each other. Spurred on by the unbelievable presence of Elvis himself, the bids for the photograph quickly climbed, surpassing anything the item would have achieved on its own. Elvis smiled, watching the bidding war he had ignited. He then casually picked up a small, unassuming guitar that had been among the auction items, donated by a local music store. It was a decent starter, guitar, but nothing special. "You know," he mused, strumming a simple chord. "I started out with a guitar not much better than this. It ain't about the fancy instrument, it's about the heart you put into it, the dreams you chase." He looked at the guitar for a moment, then back at the audience. "Tell you what, this little guitar here, I'll sign it for y'all right here, right now." Pulled out a silver marker from his jacket pocket, and with a flourish, signed his famous name across the body of the guitar. The simple, inexpensive instrument was instantly transformed into a priceless back. "And then," he continued, holding up the now signed guitar, "I'll do one more song for y'all, and then we'll auction this off. All the Proping Hand Center." The room erupted into cheers once more. The idea of owning a guitar, signed and played by Elvis Presley, even for a moment, was an unimaginable dream. He launched into jailhouse rock. His energy, he moved across the stage with that legendary iconic swagger, his voice powerful and monotonous. The small crowd was on their feet, clapping, dancing in place, completely lost in the moment. It was a performance that transcended time and space, a living piece of history unfolding before their eyes. The auction was not just saved. It was resurrected, transformed, and launched into the stratosphere by the sheer undeniable force of a true legend. The king had appeared, and the night, once destined for failure, was now destined for triumph. The ballroom pulsed with an energy that felt almost tangible. Elvis, having just delivered a rousing rendition of Jailhouse Rock, was bathed in the stage lights, his charisma radiating outward, enveloping every single person in the room. The small group of attendees who minutes ago had been ready to abandon the charity were now cheering, clapping, and some were even dancing in the aisles. It was a scene straight out of a dream. He held up the now signed acoustic guitar, his signature bold and clear on its body. "All right now," he drawled, his voice still vibrant from the performance. "This here guitar, it's got a little bit of my heart on it now. And it's for a cause that's got a whole lot of heart." Barry, the auctioneer, had clearly found his second wind, and then some. His eyes gleamed with a mixture of disbelief and pure exhilaration. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have just witnessed history. And now, you have the chance to own a piece of it, a guitar signed by the one and only Elvis Presley. And played by him right here." Tonight, the bidding started immediately, fierce and relentless. A man who had just bid on the signed sports photo was now battling against a woman who looked like a serious collector. The bids shot up like rockets, 20,000, 30,000, 50,000. The numbers scrolled across the digital display, rising higher and higher, dwarfing all previous bids for any item on the night. Elvis watched a pleased smile on his face, occasionally nodding in encouragement. He seemed genuinely invested in the success of the auction, not just a performer making an appearance. Sarah, watching from the wings, felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She had never imagined anything like this. This wasn't just about money. It was about the power of generosity, the unexpected kindness of a true legend. The guitar finally sold for an astounding $75,000. Crowd erupted in applause, and the winner, tears in her eyes, rushed forward to shake Elvis's hand. He accepted gracefully, offering a warm smile and a brief, heartfelt thank you. "Now," Elvis said, turning back to the microphone, "I reckon I've done my part for the night." He paused, then his eyes scanned the room, landing on Sarah, then Mr. Henderson. "But I just want to say, what y'all are doing here, building a place for kids to learn and grow, that's what truly matters. Keep up the good work." He then looked at Barry. "Barry, you got any more items that need a little extra push?" Barry, still reeling from the $75,000 guitar sale, quickly shuffled through his remaining items. "Well, Mr. Presley, we have Lot 58, a vacation package to Hawaii. It's been a little slow," Elvis chuckled. "Huh, sounds mighty fine, but what's really fine is helping someone find their way. How about this, folks? Whoever bids the highest on this trip, I'll record a personal voicemail message for them, anything they want me to say, long as it's polite. And for a good cause, of course." The room burst into astonished laughter and renewed bidding frenzy. A personalized voicemail from Elvis Presley. That was an instant family heirloom. A story to tell for generations. The Hawaii trip, which had languished at $500, suddenly soared to $25,000. He did this for two more items, offering a signed photo, and then, most incredibly, a scarf from his own wardrobe, which he dramatically took off and offered to the highest bidder for a rare antique watch. The scarf alone fetched $15,000. The final tally for the night, once dismal, was now absolutely staggering. The community center, once a distant dream, was now a definite reality. It wasn't just funded, it was overfunded, with enough left over for additional programs and resources. As the last item was successfully auctioned with Elvis's personal touch sending its value skyrocketing, the crowd, small as it was, gave him a standing ovation that lasted for minutes. Their faces were alight with joy, wonder, and profound gratitude. Elvis, seemingly unaffected by the whirlwind he had created, simply smiled, bowed slightly, and gave a final wave. "Thank you all for your kindness. Keep on rockin' for a good cause." Then he turned, and with John by his side, he quietly walked off stage, disappearing through the same discreet side door through which he had entered. The magic so palpable just moments before slowly began to fade, leaving behind a glow of warmth and an echo of his iconic voice. The auction was saved. The king had worked his magic. The silence that followed Elvis Presley's departure was profound, but this time it wasn't the silence of failure. It was the hush of awe, of disbelief, of a shared incredible experience that no one would ever forget. The few remaining guests simply stood there stunned, some wiping away tears, others clutching their phones, staring at blurry photos of a legend. Sarah, Mr. Henderson, and Maria rushed past, their hearts pounding. They found John standing alone near the now closed side door. "He's gone," John said simply, answering their unspoken question. "He sends his best wishes for the community center. He truly believes in what you're doing." "Thank you, Mr. John," Mr. Henderson said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say. We can never repay him." John smiled. "You don't have to just build that center. Make it a place where kids can truly shine. That's all the repayment he'd ever want." He then offered a rare, genuine handshake to each of them. "It was an honor to be a part of this. Keep up the good fight." With a final nod, John slipped out through the side door, disappearing as quietly as he had arrived. The three of them stood there for a moment, letting the enormity of what had just happened sink in. Then Mr. Henderson turned to Sarah, his eyes shining. "Sarah," he said, his voice full of gratitude, "you did it. Your wild idea, your impossible dream. You saved us. You saved the community center." Sarah felt a surge of warmth flood her chest. "We did it. Mr. Henderson, all of us, and Elvis." Maria, pragmatic as ever, but with a newfound sparkle in her eyes, rushed towards the main floor. "We need to get the final tally, Barry. Are you still alive? We just made history." Barry, looking dazed but ecstatic, was already surrounded by the remaining guests, all clamoring to talk about what they had just witnessed. "I'm more than alive, Maria," he shouted back, his voice hoarse. "I just auctioned items with Elvis Presley. I think I might need to sit down." The rest of the night was a blur of activity, but it was a joyful blur. The final numbers came in, and they were beyond anything they could have imagined. Not only had they met their goal, they had nearly tripled it. The new community center would be bigger, better, and offer more programs than they had ever dared to dream. News of Elvis Presley's surprise appearance spread like wildfire. By morning, it was on local news channels, then national. People who had dismissed the charity auction as a failure were now clamoring to donate the phones that helping hands rang off the hook for days. Donations poured in, inspired by the king's unexpected act of kindness. Weeks turned into months. The empty lot was transformed. Construction began bustling with workers and the promise of new beginnings. Sarah was there every day, watching, helping, her heart swelling with pride. She saw Mrs. Gable, the elderly woman from across the street, watching, too, a contented smile on her face. On the day the Helping Hands Community Center officially opened, a bright modern building filled with laughter and the joyful sounds of children, Sarah stood proudly beside Mr. Henderson. They looked out at the bustling rooms, a computer lab, an art studio, a bright spacious gymnasium. "It's everything we dreamed of, and more," Mr. Henderson said, a tear in his eye. "Thank you, Sarah, for not giving up, for daring to believe." Sarah smiled, looking around at the happy faces. She thought of the failing auction, the desperate silence, the flicker of a crazy idea. And then she remembered the deep, warm voice on the phone, the impossible entrance, the sheer, undeniable magic of Elvis Presley. He had come, not for fame or glory, but for a simple, selfless act of kindness. He had embodied the very spirit of generosity that she had hoped to invoke. He had reminded them that even in the darkest hours, hope can appear in the most unexpected forms, and that true legends, even decades after their prime, can still save the day and touch countless lives with nothing but their timeless spirit and a generous heart. The king was gone, but his magic and the warmth of his kindness lived on in the bustling, thriving heart of the new community center. And for Sarah, that was the most heartwarming story of all.